You combine all of them, and we outperform everybody with what we do in America. It's amazing what freedom and hard work can produce, right? What the free market, what enterprise has done in America, but this is what we do every single year. And we also are a very prosperous people. With our 4% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's wealth. This is where most people don't recognize how special America is. And I do a lot of work with young people in the summer. I work exclusively with college kids and high school students. And I tell them, if you want to understand how special America is, what you ought to do is find a church who's taking a missions trip to a third world nation. And just go spend a couple weeks in a third world nation, and you will recognize how different America is, because even if you live in poverty in America, you're more likely to have a telephone, more likely to have a television, more likely to have your own vehicle, to eat more meat, have more square feet of living space than if you live in the middle class in Western Europe, which is considered the second wealthiest place in the world. You're better off in poverty in America. The World Poverty Center, the World Poverty Bank, defines poverty. Half the world lives on less than $2 a day. 1/4 of the world lives on less than $1.25 a day. In America, to be in poverty, a family of 4, if they make less than $24,000, they're in poverty in America. Now, certainly we can look and go, yeah, for a family of 4, that's not a lot for them to make and live on. Oh, it's not a lot. But when half the world lives on less than $2 a day, I understand why so many people just want to get to America, because they can significantly improve their lives just by living in poverty in America compared to where they were in the world. And this is where we don't understand how special our nation is, how unique we have in America. Alexis de Tocqueville is the guy who wrote Democracy in America. He came to America in the 1830s, and he spent a year traveling around America, going to different states, seeing how things work. And one of the things he wrote in his book was about how unique America was. He said the position of the Americans is quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one. Now, this is where we get the phrase American exceptionalism. Is from Alexis de Tocqueville, saying that America is quite exceptional, and probably nobody else will ever enjoy what the Americans enjoy. That's what he said in the 1830s. Well, that still rings true for us today, and understanding that we do have a special nation, one of the things we ought to ask is, well then, what made us special? And by the way, saying we are special is run by American exceptionalism, and this is something that actually I've debated with people before. I had a professor one time, I gave a speech, and at the end of the speech he said, Tim, you can't say America's exceptional or we're special. He says, because America's done more bad than we've ever done good. I said, really? I said, okay. I mean, I don't mind playing this game, right? I said, well, what are all the bad things we've done? He said, well, we had slavery in America. We didn't get women's rights until the 1900s. I said, okay. I said, so if that's the standard we're going to use to measure and say America's bad because of slavery and women's rights, I said, then let me just take those two for a second. In the history of the world, can you name a nation that never had slaves? And he couldn't. Do you know why he couldn't? Because in the history of the world, every people group has at one point been enslaved and at some point enslaved somebody else. That's the history of the world. That's the history of humanity. This is part of the history of humans, is slavery. Okay? This is what's interesting then. If you're going to say that slavery makes a nation bad, then by your own definition, this is what I told them, every nation in the history of the world is a bad nation. Because they've all had slaves. I said, now, can you name a nation where white people fought white people and then freed all the black people at the end? Because I don't know of one place that actually happened. And we call it a civil war if you want to, right? That's fine. But here's, and I'm not trying to get into semantics of that, but I said, here's the point. Even if you said America's a bad nation, I could still make a very good argument that we're at least one of the best of the bad nations. Because at least we fought a war and ended slavery, and there are currently 40 million people that are enslaved today. There are nations where China's slavery is legal. India, slavery is legal. Indonesia, slavery. There are nations where this still exists, more than 40 million people enslaved today. So you can't say America's an evil nation when we ended it, it's still going on today. I said, now, let's take women's rights. I said, where do women have more rights than in America today? He said, well, I'm not talking about today. I said, well, no, you're not. But where do women have more rights than in America today? He said, well, nowhere. I said, then here's the real question. What nation gave women those rights before America did? And he couldn't give me one. I said, here's the problem. you are judging America on a standard that you judge no other nation by, and that's why America looks so bad. And I'm not defending the fact that America's not done bad things, and that we haven't had, I think we still have problems today, right? It's part of the reason we're a fan of convention of states, to solve some of these problems. This is not an argument that America is a perfect nation, but America is a special nation in spite of her imperfections. And this is where understanding what it means to be exceptional, let me give you a definition for our discussion tonight. American exceptional describes the unprecedented stability, freedom, and prosperity that is the result of the institutions and policies produced by a unique governing philosophy. Now, this is a building block sequence. Our unique philosophy led to the institutions and policies. From the institutions and policies, it created the stability, the freedom, the prosperity, the things that we enjoy today. A lot of people enjoy freedom, stability, and prosperity, but they don't know what led to the freedom, stability, and prosperity. And that's why you have so many people saying socialism is great. No, that's dumb, right? Socialism is bad, very, very bad. It's never worked at one time in the history of the world, and yet we see that the vast majority of college students today think socialism is the best economic system. Now, I also would point out, it's very easy to criticize ignorant people for being ignorant. But let me point out, I am a millennial. I'm the beginning of the millennial generation, so my people are very dumb. I get it. Let me ask this question. Who trained my people? Your people. Right? This is where we have a problem. We're saying kids in college are dumb. Who's teaching them? Really, really crazy professors are ingraining them with really bad information, and they're drawing wrong conclusions from bad information. But this is where, if we're going to say we enjoy freedom, stability, prosperity, the question we ought to ask is then what was it that we planted? What was that philosophy that brought us a unique governing philosophy? And this is where, if you think about a fruit tree, this is not complicated. I love being out in the country because generally country people understand things better, right? If you enjoy the fruit of the tree, what you want to know is, well, then what seed do we plant to get that fruit? Well, the seed that was planted was a philosophy. The seed that is planted, it grows into a structure, right, the form of a tree. Well, that was our institution and policies. It created this structure. And then from that fruit tree, you enjoy the fruit. The fruit's awesome. We like it. That's the freedom, stability, and prosperity. So if we enjoy the fruit, what we need to know is then what seed do I need to continue to plant to continue to enjoy that fruit? And this is where we have to go back and say, then what was the philosophy that was planted? If you go back to the founding fathers and saying, just asking a basic question, what was the philosophy that was planted? Well, if you start with the Declaration is something that most students don't know very much about today, and I want to give you the most brief synopsis ever. The Declaration was when we separated from King George, and the Declaration was the greatest breakup letter that was ever written. We said it is not us, it is all you, and then we listed 27 reasons why he was the problem. Okay? In the list of his grievances, what's interesting about the Declaration is that a lot of people today would say, okay, the Declaration, whatever, we live under the Constitution. In fact, even when people argue that our government is secular, they argue against the Declaration, saying, well, we don't live under the Declaration, we live under the Constitution. Well, that's fine. We do have the Constitution part of our nation. It's a very important part. But one of the things that's interesting, the Supreme Court had a case many years ago where they were arguing over the definition of a law. What does this law mean? How does it work? And they came up with a brilliant standard. They said, if you want to know why we have that law in place, they said, what you need to do is go back and determine what evil were they trying to remedy by writing that law. And then you will know the intent of the law. So if you look, for example, at the Constitution, which is awesome, we love the Constitution, you have Article 1, Section 5, Clause 4. In that, it says that neither house during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two houses shall be sitting. Now, this is where we say we're going to have the same location that we're going to meet every time. Well, why would they do that? That seems obvious, right? We have a Capitol building. It's where you go. You go to the Capitol. It's where you do business. It's where legislators go. Why do we have to clarify this? Well, if you actually back up to the Declaration, one of the grievances in the Declaration was that the king kept changing where they were meeting so that our representatives never got to show up and their voices were never heard under the king. So what's interesting, when you look at why did we pass the law we did, well, if you want to understand, you need to know the evil that was trying to be remedied. Every single grievance in the Declaration was solved in the Constitution. This is why we did what we did. If you go to the grievance 5, it dissolved representative meeting houses. The king did. So, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2, guess what we established? Representative houses. In grievance 7, the king refused to allow immigration. So, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, we have standard rules for immigration. In grievance number 8, the king refused American judges. So, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9, we establish how we're going to have American judges. In grievance 11, the king said, the king said you're going to have standing armies, you're going to house them. We said Declaration, we don't like that. We don't want standing armies. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12, we don't have standing armies anymore. This is the point. As you look at every grievance in the Declaration, you find the answer in the Constitution. No civilian control of the military. So Article 1, right? Section 8, Clause 14, we have civilian control of the military. This is what the Founding Fathers did. So when we look at the Constitution, as much as we applaud it, understand the Constitution is written because of the Declaration. That is the reason we did what we did. If you go back to the U.S. Supreme Court, they gave an explanation of this. The U.S. Supreme Court explained the Constitution is but the body and letter, of which the Declaration is the thought and the spirit. So the Declaration is what it gives it life. They explained it is always safe to read the letter of the Constitution and the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. So if you read the Constitution without understanding what the Declaration says, the Constitution won't make very much sense to you. But when you understand what the Declaration says, and then you read the Constitution, you go, oh, that's why they did what they did. And this is the point. When you look at the Founding Fathers, we often get a very incomplete picture of the Founding Fathers because we don't know what they were trying to solve when they did what they did. So let me back you up. Let me go to the Declaration and the National Birth Certificate. This is where our nation started. In 126 words, the Founding Fathers laid out 5 immutable principles. And I'm going to walk through those pretty quickly tonight, and then I'm going to tell you the 6th principle they laid out. But let's start with the first 5. The first one is a phrase you guys will recognize. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator. In the Declaration, we explained that there was a Creator God. And this is a huge issue because the king thought he was God. And the Founding Fathers said, no, you're not God. Right? Pretty sure he doesn't look like you. They explain, we believe there is a Creator, and this is going to matter significantly going forward, but just to highlight that, they said that this is the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. In the Declaration, John Hancock explained, when they're writing this, that we will only include those things which everybody agrees with, because if we are not united, then we will all hang. And this is when Franklin in his pithy way, says, well, certainly, we must all hang together or else we will all hang separately. So, right, it was kind of a joke moment, but John Hancock said, we're only going to do what everybody agrees on. Every single representative from every single state agreed, no, we believe there's a divine Creator, which you see continued out when George Washington becomes president, 1789, he's sworn in. One of the things he's encouraged to do by the Congress is we ought to have a time to thank God that we've now become a nation, that we made it through the revolution, all the things that happened. So George Washington did the very first presidential prayer proclamation. We actually have an original copy of that proclamation. It's what you're looking at. In this proclamation, he explained in the first paragraph why he was doing this. And here's what he told the American people. George Washington says, it is the duty of all nations. And let me highlight the word duty, because the word duty is not really common vernacular for a lot of us today. If you back up and look up the word duty in Webster's 1828 dictionary is a legally binding moral or contractual obligation. So it's something you are legally bound to. Washington says it is the duty of nations. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. It's significant. He says there's 4 things they should do. Acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor. There are 4 things, he says, that we have to do, and in those 4 things, those are things that he didn't say Christians should do, or religious people should do. Notice what he said. He said this is a duty for nations. Now, at the time of George Washington, there was a whole bunch of people who weren't Christians living in America. A bunch of people who didn't believe in God, so why would he say that this is the duty for nations? Because what we always understood in America is even if you don't believe in God, there is a God, and we're going to acknowledge it. Now, in America, you're free to not believe. That's fine. But we believe there's a God, and this is actually going to be really significant going forward, but you see this even in their writings. It's a duty of nations to acknowledge God. So the first thing I would point out for declaration is we believe there was a divine creator, and here's where it gets more significant for us. They are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. The Declaration outlines that there is a right that man has that has come from the divine creator. This is what inalienable rights are, but don't take my word for it. If we ask a question, what's an inalienable right? Let me take you back to founding fathers. You have people like John Dickinson. He was the governor of Pennsylvania and Delaware. He was a member of the Continental Congress. He says, a right which God gave to you and which no inferior power has a right to take away. I would point out by definition, every power is inferior to God. So if God has given you something, nobody can take it from you. This is what he said was an inalienable right. We have Alexander Hamilton, who is a very famous name also for the Revolution. He's one of the signers of the Constitution, one of the authors of the Federalist Papers. He was the aide-de-camp to Washington during the Revolution. Alexander Hamilton also wrote about inalienable rights. He says, they are not to be rummaged for among old parchments or musty records. They are written as with a sunbeam in the whole volume of human nature by the hand of divinity itself and can never be erased or obscured by mortal power. So mortal power can't change what God has done, meaning man cannot take away or restrict what God has given to us. John Adams says something also very similar. John Adams says, inalienable rights are antecedent to all earthly governments. Rights that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws. Rights derived from the great legislator of the universe. Now, he acknowledges they come from God, the great legislator, but let me back you up. He says these are antecedent to all earthly government. Now, what he's arguing is that the rights we have came before government even existed, which is definitely a biblical thought, because if you read Genesis, Adam and Eve were in the garden, there's been no government yet, and yet God's given them the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, right? They have rights before government ever exists. In fact, in the Bible, government doesn't exist until roughly Genesis chapter 9. It's part of the Noahic covenant. The Noahide laws is what it was known as. The 7 laws of Noah. When Noah gets off the ark, the very first command God gave is if man sheds blood, by man his blood shall be shed. Well, this was the idea that we're not going to allow murder to reign freely as it had before the flood, which is part of what led to the flood. But that's a command that was given to civil government. So government happened after God had already given rights to man, and that's important because that means government didn't give us our rights. God gave us our rights. Whatever government gives, they think they can take away, or tax, or restrict, right? No. These rights didn't come from government, they came from God. This is what the Founding Fathers understood. So if we know we have God-given rights, the question is, what are those God-given rights? And this is where the Founding Fathers wrote a lot about this. Sam Adams talked about those rights. He says, first is the right to life, secondly to liberty, and thirdly to property. Now Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but all the early arguments were always property because the king thought he owned everything. He could take whatever he wanted when he wanted. They said, no, we believe in private property. And so this was the idea. In fact, when you go to the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights were a listing of other things that we believed that God had also given rights. And I will point out that the Ninth Amendment says any rights we didn't specify doesn't mean people don't have them. There's still rights among the people. 10th Amendment is what's not explicitly given to the federal government belongs to the states, which we've totally lost that idea today, that states have rights, but it's part of the Constitution. Nonetheless, these are rights we believed outlining in the Bill of Rights that government can never touch. Government can never touch religion. Government can never touch our speech. Government can never touch our self-defense. Government can never touch our private property. We went through a list of things the federal government could never touch because we understood government tends to be abusive and violate rights. So we highlighted these are rights government can never touch or take away. But this is because we believed that we had rights that came from God. The third thing I would point to is that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Why does government exist according to the Founding Fathers? To protect our God-given rights. Now, here's why this is significant. If there is no God, there are no God-given rights. And in life, there are only two options. You either have a big God or a big government. And this is where there is a dilemma for most people today. Because even people that choose to be secular, not all of them like a big government. I've got a lot of friends who don't believe in God, but they want a limited government. And here's the problem. If there is no God, then who determines what's right and wrong? Right? Well, it's up to every individual. What if an individual decides it's okay to murder people? Well, clearly that's wrong. Why? If there's not an objective, moral, revealed standard, then what are we going to base right and wrong on? And this is where, check, did I lose my mic? Check, test. Check. Yeah, oh, okay. I'll talk loud if it goes out. We're okay. The Founding Fathers believed government's primary role is to protect our rights as individuals. James Wilson, who signed the Declaration and signed the Constitution, and was a U.S. Supreme Court Justice appointed by George Washington, he then started some of the first law schools in America. The first law books that were used in law schools were from his law lectures. So this guy knew things pretty well. Here's one of the things he explained to his law students. The principal object of government was to acquire a new security for the possession of those rights which were previously entitled by the immediate gift of our all-wise and all-beneficent Creator. He's telling his law students, and this is the first organized law school in America where he's teaching. He's telling all students, the reason government exists is to protect God-given rights. Well, this is the same thing Sam Adams says. Sam Adams says that government was originally designed for the preservation of unalienable rights. This is why government exists, to protect our God-given rights. And then he goes further, and this is when he writes that first is the right to life, secondly to liberty, and thirdly to property. Now, let me point out, the sequence of this actually is important. Okay, he says the very first of the animal rights is the right to life. I don't think that's just an arbitrary thought, right? I think that actually is the first of the rights, and I think you can make a valid argument that it has to be first, because if you're not alive, nothing else matters, right? So this has to be the first one that we look at and protect. Well, it's also interesting to me that he says right to life, because there was just a march in Washington, D.C., right, for the right to life. Right to life is the language that the pro-life movement has embraced, definitely in our modern culture, saying we believe in life. One of the things we always want to do, though, when we look at historical writings or documents, is say, but what did they mean? It's easy to just put things in modern vernacular. No. What did they mean when they wrote it? And this is where it would be interesting if we could say, now the Founding Fathers were talking about abortion, and that's why abortion is wrong, except we know that generally speaking, abortion was not an issue in the founding era. One, two, or three. If you have a blue Ford F-150, it's blocking something, and somebody should move. Blue Ford F-150, maybe, I don't know.
Nope, she's got it.
Mine's black and it's in Texas, so it wasn't me.
Mine's white.
Okay, so what did they mean by right to life? And here's where one of the things that is fascinating is how, because we have better technology, a lot of times we think we are smarter or have different issues. One of the things that King Solomon wrote, it's in the Bible in Ecclesiastes, is there's nothing new under the sun. We have a book in our library from 1808. It's Observations on Abortion.
Yep.
Do you know abortion's not a new issue?
That's right.
Now, the technology has changed. What has not changed is as long as there were girls getting pregnant, there were girls that didn't want to be pregnant. In fact, if you go back, if you're a Bible scholar, Exodus chapter 1 was the first selective abortions. When Pharaoh says, all the boys we kill, all the girls we keep. This is not a brand new concept in world history or even American history, but this is where, because we don't know a lot of American history or world history, we think that we deal with brand new issues. The Founding Fathers actually dealt with a lot more issues than we realize, and when they say first is the right to life, were they actually talking about life? Let me show you a few writings that indicate they were. James Wilson talking to his students in law school. This is from his law books, from his law lectures. Here's what he told them. With consistency, beautiful and undeviating, human life from its commencement to its close is protected by the common law. Now, first of all, we have arguments today about when life begins and when life ends. He says commencement to close. There are people, there's a professor from the University of Texas I've heard make this argument. He says that you should be able to abort a child up to 2 years of age. Because they do not have full sentience, cognizance, or sustainability on their own. Therefore, their life should be expendable up to 2 years of age. Now, that is ludicrous on so many levels, but there are people making those kind of arguments. So, the argument is not, well, we believe that life is valuable necessarily. The argument really is, well, when does it actually begin? And when does it actually end? And, right, so we would say from natural beginning to natural end, but when does natural beginning happen? Well, James Wilson actually addressed that. Here's what he told his law students. In the contemplations of law, life begins when the infant is first able to stir in the womb. By the law, life is protected. Now he's telling every law student, as soon as a mother knows she is pregnant, as soon as that baby's stirring in the womb, the law protects that life of the unborn child. That's the law of America. Now, beyond the fact of, right, what week into pregnancy that is, I want you to think differently. He says as soon as the infant stirs in the womb, at that point in world history, when did you know you were pregnant? Not until the infant stirred in the womb. Right? Before that, maybe it's pizza or tacos or something weird, right? And back then, there was no magic stick to pee on that turned colors, and positive and negative and whatever else. Okay? So you did not know until, but here's his argument. His argument is, as soon as we know there is life in the womb, the law protects that life. Well, today, technology allows you to know within 8 days of a fertilized egg. His argument is, as soon as we know there is life, the law protects that life. John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration, he was the president of Princeton University, trained more founding fathers than any other single individual. Here's what he told his students at Princeton University. A perfect right in a state of natural liberty is the right to life. Now, when he's giving this talk, he was comparing how America and France were different. France believed in liberty, equality, fraternity, but they didn't believe in the same moral structure, which is why what really was the symbol of the French Revolution was the guillotine. And 40,000 people were executed with the guillotine. He says America is different, and here's part of where he says there's a contrast between America and France. He says, in America, we have denied the power of life and death to parents. He says France allows them to choose whether or not they're going to keep that child. In America, the only choice mom and dad has but led to them getting pregnant. Once they're pregnant, the law protects the life of that unborn child. This is what we believed in America because the first of the inalienable rights is the right to life, and this is the first. Now, I will go even further. We're doing a lot of work inside political circles. We will tell people one of the best indicators you can get of someone's philosophy of government, someone's worldview, is their position on the right to life. The reason is, if you do not believe that life is sacred, that God is the author and giver of life, then you're probably not going to believe or be in favor of religious liberty, because why should we be able to acknowledge a God who did not give us life? But if God gave us life, then you probably believe that a kid should be able to pray over his lunch in a public school, or a graduating valedictorian can mention God in their speech, or whatever the case is. But I can tell you where someone's going to stand on the issue of religious liberty just based on the way they view a right to life, statistically speaking. Also, if you look at the issue of self-defense, if they do not believe that God is the author and giver of life, then life is not special or sacred, and therefore even the ability to defend life becomes a relative notion or concept. This is something that when I was in college, I ran cross country. After college, I ran a lot of marathons, and I loved running. I thought it would be fun one day, now that I was young and dumb, right? I was in my 20s, but I thought it'd be so fun if I was walking in Dallas, because I'm from Texas, and if somebody came to me and like pulled out a knife and they said, "Give me all your money," and I would just go, "Catch me if you can." And I was going to start running because I could run 26 miles without stopping. This would be so fun. And at that point, if you catch me, like, okay, you probably deserve my wallet. If you ran 26 miles, you can have it. But then I got married, and I thought, this is the worst strategy in the world. All right, honey, here's what we're going to do. Right? So what happened is, I got my concealed handgun license, and I trained, and I still do a lot of training. I actually train people now, because not that I ever want bad things to happen, but I want to protect my wife. Now I have a daughter. I want to make sure they are safe. Why? Because I believe that life is sacred, because God is the author and giver of life.
That's right.
And I want to stop evil that wants to stop or harm my family. But if you don't believe God's the author and giver of life, life is not as special and sacred, and therefore you feel differently about self-defense or the Second Amendment. Also, we could talk about something like the idea of marriage. If God's not the author and giver of life, then marriage wasn't a covenant between a man and woman that God established. It's just a piece of paper, and anybody, 3 women, 2 dudes, 4 men and a girl, like, it doesn't matter, because it's a piece of paper. Well, I know where you're going to stand on the issue based on how you view a right to life, because that's going to indicate your philosophy or your worldview. The last thing I'll even point to is even private property becomes very significant. Because if you don't believe God's the author and giver of life, you probably don't believe in the 10 Commandments, which says don't steal and don't even covet what somebody else's. The Founding Fathers also pointed out that your personal income was private property, and the government should have no access to that. which I would be a fan of, right? Every paycheck,
That's right.
I keep thinking, I should have more than I have. But this is private property. Now, one of the things that a lot of people tell us is, wait a second. You're arguing from social issues, right? This moral perspective, but I hear all the time, well, I'm an economics person. I'm an economic conservative. I'm an economic libertarian. I'm an economic whatever. And we think that economics has to now be different from a moral platform. Well, let me just show you from a practical standpoint. If you look at the government, I understand why you care about economics, because we are doing dumb spending things. Even though President Trump has helped build our economy strongest ever, we're still spending more than we're making. So that's still a problem. I think every family, right? It's kind of financial 101. Spend less than you make and you always have money. For whatever reason, the federal government has not figured that out yet. So I get if people are concerned economically, we have a lot of problems, we're going to solve it. Well, let me back you up though and say that I would again argue life is one of the most important things and the best indicator of philosophy. The national right to life, the only issue they track is the issue of life. It's all they care about. They don't track anything else, anybody else. All they track, and every single year, they look at congressmen and they rank the very best and the very worst congressmen just on how they vote on the issue of life. They care about nothing else. And so every year they come out with a list. Well, there's groups that track everything, right? The NRA tracks the Second Amendment. You pick a list and they track whatever you care about. The environment, animal rights, there's groups that track it. One of the groups that tracks economics is a group, Americans for Prosperity. And they come out with a list. They said this is the very best economic representatives this last year. Now, if you look, on the right was the best in life. On the left, as far as the yellow column, is the best economically. That is a one-to-one correlation. Maybe it's coincidence. So if we look at the people who were the worst life representatives, and then we put that list up against the people who were the worst economic representatives, do you know what you find?
Matched.
A one-to-one correlation. Do you know why? Because there's a basic principle that most Americans have forgotten. If they won't protect your life, they won't protect your money.
That's right.
It's not that complicated, except in some culture today. But here's the point, is we understood that government's primary job is to protect our rights. The first right is a right to life, but we can go through all the rights. Government exists to protect our God-given rights, is what we put in the Declaration. The fourth thing I would point to, actually, they wrote at the beginning of the Declaration, to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them. We believed in a fixed moral law, which is what the laws of nature and nature's God meant. Most people today don't know where that comes from. That phrase actually came from William Blackstone, who wrote Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. John Adams says that Americans would study Blackstone like Muslims would study the Quran, which meant they studied a lot. So we were very familiar with that phrase in America. And so the laws of nature, nature's God, what Blackstone, he wrote in like 30 pages in his Commentaries on the Laws of England, he wrote and explained that everything we need to know about life has been revealed two ways. It has been revealed in God's creation, the laws of nature, and it's been revealed in God's divine revelation, the Bible, the laws of nature's God. And most people today, we don't know the laws of nature well enough to know that they actually do give us really good indication of things that are right and wrong. So let me just for a second, let me just walk you through some laws of nature. If we never had a fixed moral law, like if you're a Christian, let's say we never had the Bible. We don't have the Bible, so how do we know what's right